The Master of Meadowbrook Manor, a Miss Marple mystery. Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins at Meadowbrook Manor, a grand estate whose new master arrives with impeccable manners and a past no one can quite explain. The villagers welcome him politely, but before long, quiet whispers begin to spread through St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple notices the little things others dismiss: a locked room, an unexpected visitor, and a story that changes each time it is told. The deeper she looks, the clearer it becomes that the master of the manor is guarding far more than his privacy. Because sometimes the grandest houses hide the darkest truths. Before we uncover the secrets of Meadowbrook Manor, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting Miss Marple mysteries on Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The Master Returns to Meadowbrook Manor. The village of Meadowbrook was the sort of place where news traveled fast and secrets never truly died. So when word spread that Edmund Harrow had returned to Meadowbrook Manor after 20 years away, the entire village began talking. Most people remembered him well. He had once been charming, ambitious, and destined to inherit the grand manor overlooking the village. Then came scandal. Money disappeared from a local investment venture. Friendships collapsed. His engagement to Clara Finch ended without explanation. Before anyone could learn the full truth, Edmund left Meadowbrook and vanished from village life. Now he was back. His black motor car rolled up the long drive of Meadowbrook Manor on a cold autumn morning. Within days, the once silent house was alive again. Lights glowed in the windows. Servants came and went. Smoke rose from the chimneys. It seemed the old master had returned for good. Miss Marple heard the news while taking tea in the village. Like many others, she found the timing curious. People often return home for comfort. Others returned because unfinished business was waiting for them. A few days later, Edmund announced a gathering at the manor. Several villagers received invitations, including Clara Finch. That surprised everyone. Years earlier, Clara had been engaged to Edmund before their sudden separation. Neither had ever explained what happened. Even now, their past remained one of Meadowbrook's favorite mysteries. The evening of the gathering arrived beneath dark clouds and steady rain. Guests filled the dining room while Edmund entertained them with stories of his years away. He smiled often, but something about him seemed uneasy. More than once, Miss Marple noticed him glancing towards the study door across the hall. As dinner ended, Edmund stood and raised his glass. "My friends," he said, "returning to Meadowbrook has reminded me that some matters cannot remain unsettled forever." The room fell quiet. There are old debts, old mistakes, and old secrets that eventually demand attention. His gaze briefly settled on Clara Finch. She met his eyes calmly. "And have you settled them?" she asked. For a moment, his smile faded. "Not all of them," he replied. An uncomfortable silence followed. Later that night, the storm grew worse. Most of the guests departed while thunder rolled across the countryside. Shortly before midnight, a servant heard angry voices coming from Edmund's study. One voice belonged to Edmund. The other voice was unknown. The argument became louder. Then came a sudden crash, a heavy thud, and then nothing. The next morning, the study door was found locked from the inside. When it was finally opened, Edmund Harrow, the master of Meadowbrook Manor, was dead. Chapter 2. The Death Inside the Study. By sunrise, the news had already begun spreading across Meadowbrook. People spoke of little else. The return of Edmund Harrow had been the village's greatest topic of conversation for weeks. Now his death had replaced it. Curtains twitched as neighbors exchanged rumors. Shopkeepers paused their work to discuss the tragedy. By mid-morning, nearly everyone knew that the master of Meadowbrook Manor had been found dead inside his study. Inside the manor, the mood was bleak. The cheerful atmosphere from the previous evening had vanished completely. Servants moved quietly through the halls. Guests who had remained overnight spoke in low voices. Nobody seemed quite sure what to think. The study itself presented a troubling scene. Edmund Harrow lay beside his desk where he had fallen. A bronze horse ornament rested a short distance away on the carpet. Dr. Hayes examined the body carefully and reached his conclusion almost at once. Edmund had not died by accident. A powerful blow to the back of the head had killed him. Someone had struck him deliberately. What troubled everyone even more was the condition of the room. The study door had been locked from the inside. The windows were secured. There was no hidden passage, no obvious escape route. It seemed impossible that a murderer could have entered the room, committed the crime, and then disappeared without leaving any trace behind. When Inspector Blake arrived from the county police, he immediately began a detailed examination of the study. He searched every corner of the room. Shelves packed with books lined the walls. Papers were scattered across the desk. The fireplace contained the remains of burned documents. Yet nothing appeared broken or disturbed apart from the dead man himself. The inspector's attention soon settled on Edmund's desk. Several drawers contained ordinary correspondence and financial records. One drawer, however, was completely empty. That immediately struck him as odd. The drawer showed no sign of damage. It had not been forced open. Someone had simply removed whatever had been stored inside. The question was whether the missing contents were valuable or dangerous. As the investigation began, the inspector questioned everyone who attended the gathering. Clara Finch remained calm throughout her interview. She admitted that she and Edmund had spoken privately during the evening. According to her, Edmund seemed burdened with guilt. He wanted to discuss the past, things he should have spoken about years ago, she explained. "What sort of things?" asked the inspector. "The sort of things people hide when they are ashamed." The inspector studied her carefully. "Did you argue?" "A little." "Did you forgive him?" Clara hesitated. "I honestly don't know." Roger Harrow proved less cooperative. Edmund's cousin appeared nervous from the moment questioning began. He admitted that his finances were in poor condition and that he recently asked Edmund for money. "And he refused?" asked the inspector. "Yes." "Did that anger you?" Roger gave a bitter laugh. "It would anger anyone." The housekeeper provided another interesting detail. During the days leading up to his death, Edmund had received several letters. Their contents were unknown, but they seemed to trouble him deeply. More than once, she had noticed him reading them alone before locking them away. One servant recalled seeing Edmund standing beside the fireplace late one evening. "He was burning papers, sir," the servant said. "A whole stack of them." "What kind of papers?" "I couldn't say." With every interview, the picture grew darker. Edmund Harrow had not returned to Meadowbrook simply to enjoy retirement. Something had followed him home, something serious enough to make him nervous, secretive, and afraid.
That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the manor at Inspector Blake's request. Although the inspector occasionally found her observations irritating, experience had taught him not to ignore them. Together, they entered the study. The room felt strangely still. Sunlight filtered through the windows. Dust drifted lazily through the air. Nothing appeared unusual at first glance, yet Miss Marple knew that appearances often lied. She moved slowly around the room, observing details others might overlook: the position of the furniture, the arrangement of papers on the desk, the marks near the fireplace. Then her attention settled on something near the edge of the carpet. A button, small, black, ordinary. It lay partially hidden beneath a chair. Miss Marple bent down and picked it up. Inspector Blake looked puzzled. A button? Yes. That hardly seems important. Miss Marple turned it thoughtfully between her fingers. Perhaps not, but people rarely notice the things they leave behind. The inspector said nothing. He had heard similar remarks from her before, and they often proved correct. As they continued examining the room, Miss Marple paused beside the desk. Her eyes settled upon the empty drawer. She did not know what had been taken from it, but she felt certain it mattered. People did not murder over worthless papers. They murdered to protect secrets, or to prevent them from being revealed. As evening approached, shadows stretched across the study floor. Miss Marple stood quietly beside the window overlooking the village below. Somewhere within Meadowbrook Manor, someone knew far more than they were admitting. Someone had lied to the police. Someone had hidden the truth. And unless she was greatly mistaken, the murder of Edmund Harrow was only the beginning of a much older story.
Chapter 3. The Shadow over Meadowbrook. The murder of Edmund Harrow cast a heavy shadow over Meadowbrook. By the following morning, the peaceful village no longer felt quite the same. Shopkeepers lowered their voices whenever the manor was mentioned. Neighbors stopped one another in the lane to exchange fresh rumors. Some believed a stranger must have slipped into the house during the storm. Others insisted the killer had been sitting at the dinner table all along. Miss Marple paid little attention to the gossip itself, but she always listened carefully to the small details hidden inside it. Villagers had curious memories. People forgot dates and names, yet they rarely forgot unusual behavior. So instead of remaining at the manor, she quietly walked through Meadowbrook, speaking with those who had known Edmund before he disappeared 20 years earlier. Nearly everyone described the same man: clever, charming, and always watching the room before he spoke. One elderly gardener remembered that Edmund had once confessed there was a mistake he wished he could erase. At the time, nobody understood what he meant. Now, those words sounded far more troubling. When Miss Marple returned to Meadowbrook Manor, Inspector Blake had already spent hours searching every room. The study had revealed nothing new, but Edmund's bedroom told a different story. Hidden behind a row of coats inside an old wardrobe stood a small iron lockbox. The inspector expected it to contain money, jewelry, or perhaps a diary. Instead, it was completely empty. Whoever had cleared it out had done so carefully, leaving not even a loose sheet of paper behind. Nearby, the inspector also found a torn envelope bearing no letter inside. The seal had been broken only recently, and the address had been cut away with a sharp blade. Miss Marple examined the envelope for a moment before quietly observing that people rarely destroyed names unless they feared someone else might recognize them. Inspector Blake agreed, but the discovery only deepened the mystery. Between the empty drawer in the study, the burned papers in the fireplace, and now the vacant lockbox, someone had been removing evidence long before the police arrived.
That afternoon, Clara Finch asked Miss Marple to accompany her through the manor gardens. The rain had stopped, leaving the paths damp beneath their feet, while the autumn wind scattered leaves across the lawn. For several minutes they walked without speaking. At last, Clara admitted that Edmund had seemed frightened during their private conversation on the night of the dinner. He had apologized for mistakes made years before, but refused to explain them fully. According to Clara, he had only said that someone had been demanding money from him for months, and that returning to Meadowbrook was the only way to end it. Before she could ask who was threatening him, another guest entered the room, and the conversation ended. Clara confessed she had not believed him at the time. Now she wished she had pressed him for the truth. Miss Marple listened without interrupting. Blackmail explained many things, but not a locked room, and certainly not a murderer who seemed determined to erase every document Edmund had kept hidden. As evening settled over the manor, another unexpected witness stepped forward. One of the younger servants nervously admitted that during the storm he had seen someone leaving the corridor outside Edmund's study only minutes before the shouting began. The light had been poor, making it impossible to recognize a face, but one detail stood out clearly. The figure had been using a walking stick. Inspector Blake immediately looked towards Roger Harrow, the only guest known to carry one that evening. Roger denied entering the study and dismissed the servant's account as imagination. His answers remained calm, almost too calm, yet there was something about his confidence that unsettled Miss Marple. Innocent people often became flustered when accused. Roger appeared almost prepared for the questions. Long after darkness covered Meadowbrook, Miss Marple returned alone to the study. She stood silently in the center of the room, allowing her eyes to wander across every familiar detail once more. Then, almost by accident, she noticed faint scratches running across the polished floor beneath Edmund's desk. They were fresh. Something heavy had been dragged only a short distance before being pushed back into place. She slowly knelt beside the desk and rested her hand against the worn floorboards. Whatever was once hidden there was no longer present. Someone had found it first. Someone had known exactly where to look. And for the first time since the investigation began, Miss Marple became certain that Edmund Harrow had not returned to Meadowbrook to start a new life. He had returned because something buried in the past was waiting for him, and someone had been willing to kill to keep it buried forever.
Chapter 4. The Secret Beneath the Manor. The following morning began with an unexpected discovery. While two constables continued searching the lower floor of Meadowbrook Manor, one of them noticed that the large bookcase inside Edmund Harrow's study was standing slightly away from the wall. At first it appeared to be nothing more than uneven flooring, but after moving the heavy cabinet a few inches, they uncovered a narrow wooden panel built into the wall behind it. The panel had clearly been opened many times over the years. Its hinges were polished for use, while the surrounding wood remained coated in dust. Inspector Blake carefully lifted it aside and revealed a small hidden compartment. It was empty. Whatever had once been concealed there had already been removed. Even so, the discovery changed everything. Edmund had been hiding something inside his study for years, and someone else had known exactly where to find it before the police ever arrived. Miss Marple examined the compartment without saying very much. She was less interested in the empty space than in the marks surrounding it. Tiny scratches covered the edge of the wooden panel, suggesting that whoever had opened it recently had done so in great haste. There was also a faint smear of candle wax beneath the opening, despite the study being well supplied with lamps. That detail caught her attention immediately.
A person carrying a candle usually wished to avoid attracting notice. Someone had entered the study quietly, probably late at night, searching for whatever Edmund had hidden away. Inspector Blake ordered another search of the manor from attic to cellar, but nothing of importance appeared. Every cupboard, every drawer, every locked chest proved equally disappointing. It was as though the killer had known precisely what to take, leaving everything else untouched. Meanwhile, Roger Harrow's behavior became increasingly difficult to ignore. Throughout the day, he wandered nervously through the manor, never remaining in one room for long. More than once he seemed ready to leave the estate, only to remember that the police had forbidden anyone from departing. Miss Marple watched him from a distance without making herself obvious. She noticed him pause beside the old family portraits in the entrance hall, staring at one particular painting of Edmund's grandfather before quietly walking away. Curious, she examined the portrait herself. Hidden in the lower corner, almost impossible to notice, was the image of a silver pocket watch hanging from the old gentleman's waistcoat. Later, while speaking with the elderly housekeeper, Miss Marple learned that the watch had once been considered the most valuable possession in the Harrow family. Not because of its worth, but because it had supposedly concealed a secret known only to the head of the household. Nobody had seen the watch for more than 20 years. That evening, another piece of the puzzle appeared almost by accident. A maid cleaning the guest rooms discovered a crumpled page tucked beneath Roger Harrow's bed. It contained only a few handwritten words, the rest having been torn away. The surviving sentence read, "Meet me in the study before midnight. Bring the key. Tell no one." Inspector Blake immediately questioned Roger, who insisted he had never seen the note before. His explanation sounded reasonable enough, yet it failed to explain how the paper had reached his room. Miss Marple read the message several times before folding it carefully into her pocket. One word continued to trouble her more than any other: the key. A hidden compartment, missing papers, an empty lockbox, and now a mysterious key that nobody could account for. They were not separate clues at all. They belonged to the same story. As darkness settled over Meadowbrook Manor once again, Miss Marple stood at the study window, looking towards the quiet village below. Somewhere inside the house, someone still possessed that missing key. Somewhere inside the house, the real secret of Meadowbrook Manor remained hidden, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that before the truth came to light, another life would be placed in danger.
Chapter 5. Miss Marple Sees the Truth. The investigation had now reached a point where every answer seemed to create two new questions. Inspector Blake remained convinced that the missing papers were the key to the murder, yet despite searching every room in Meadowbrook Manor, they had found nothing. Miss Marple, however, had stopped looking for the papers themselves. Instead, she began watching the people. In her experience, murderers rarely revealed themselves through clever plans. They revealed themselves through ordinary habits: a careless glance, an unnecessary remark, a moment of panic when something unexpected happened. During breakfast, she noticed that every guest spoke about Edmund Harrow's death with sadness, except one. Roger Harrow hardly mentioned his cousin at all. Whenever the conversation drifted towards the missing documents, he became unusually quiet, as though he feared saying either too much or too little. It was not proof of guilt, but it was enough to keep Miss Marple's attention firmly fixed upon him. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple asked the elderly housekeeper to show her the oldest parts of the manor. Together they descended into rooms that had not been used for many years. Dust covered the furniture, while faded portraits stared silently from the walls.
Beneath the main staircase, they entered a narrow storage room filled with broken chairs, old trunks, and forgotten family possessions. As the housekeeper spoke about the history of the estate, Miss Marple noticed something resting inside an open wooden chest. It was an old silver pocket watch, heavily tarnished with age. The same watch she had seen painted in the portrait of Edmund's grandfather. She carefully opened the case, expecting to find nothing more than worn clockwork. Instead, folded inside the back cover, hidden so neatly it could easily be overlooked, was a tiny scrap of paper containing several numbers and the name of a bank in the nearest market town. The paper looked decades old, yet someone had unfolded it recently. Suddenly, the stories surrounding the Harrow family no longer sounded like village legends. Edmund had not been protecting money, he had been protecting evidence that had survived for generations. Miss Marple took the discovery straight to Inspector Blake. Together they traveled to the bank that afternoon, hoping the numbers might identify a forgotten account or storage box. The manager searched through records that stretched back many years before finally producing a small deposit register. It confirmed that the Harrow family had rented a secure box decades earlier, but according to the records, someone had emptied it only 3 days before Edmund's murder. The signature used to claim its contents belonged to Edmund himself, yet Miss Marple immediately noticed something unusual. The handwriting looked forced, almost as though another person had tried very hard to copy it. Inspector Blake requested every document connected with the withdrawal. As he examined them, his expression slowly changed. Whoever had collected the contents of that box had almost certainly forged Edmund's signature, which meant the murderer had begun stealing evidence before the crime had even taken place. Returning to Meadowbrook Manor after sunset, Miss Marple gathered everything she had learned and quietly replayed the events of the fatal evening. In her own mind, that question had already been answered. The real difficulty lay elsewhere. She still had to prove it. Somewhere inside the manor was one final piece of evidence, small enough to escape notice, yet important enough to expose the murderer beyond any doubt. Until she found it, the killer remained free, watching every move she made, and perhaps already planning one final desperate act before morning arrived.
Chapter 6. The Master's Final Secret. The following morning, Inspector Blake gathered everyone inside the drawing room of Meadowbrook Manor. Heavy clouds hung over the estate once again, while a steady wind rattled the old windows. The servants stood quietly near the doorway. Clara Finch remained calm, though the strain of the past few days showed plainly upon her face. Roger Harrow appeared composed, yet he avoided looking directly at anyone in the room. Miss Marple sat quietly beside the fireplace, her hands folded neatly in her lap, waiting until the room had fallen completely silent before she began to speak. She explained that everyone had been searching for the wrong answer. The missing papers had certainly been important, but they were never the true mystery. The real question was why Edmund Harrow had returned to Meadowbrook after 20 years. He had not come home simply to enjoy his old estate. He had come because he intended to put right a terrible mistake that had haunted him for most of his life. Years earlier, when money disappeared from the village investment fund, everyone assumed Edmund had taken it. He allowed the village to believe the worst, then quietly disappeared. Yet the missing papers, the hidden compartment, and the old bank records all revealed a different story. Edmund had discovered who the real thief was many years ago, but he had kept silent to protect someone within his own family. That silence had grown heavier with every passing year, until he finally decided to tell the truth. Miss Marple then turned her attention towards Roger Harrow. She spoke gently, never raising her voice, yet every word landed with remarkable precision. Roger knew exactly what Edmund planned to reveal.
Days before the dinner, he forged Edmund's signature and emptied the family's secure deposit box before the genuine documents could be collected. On the evening of the gathering, while everyone believed they were enjoying a pleasant meal, Roger slipped into the study and removed the remaining papers from the hidden compartment. When Edmund discovered what had happened, the two men argued fiercely. Roger realized that if Edmund survived the night, the truth would finally become public. In desperation, he seized the bronze horse from the desk and struck his cousin from behind. The inspector listened without interruption, though one question remained unanswered. "The study was locked from the inside," he said quietly. "How did Roger leave the room?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "The answer was in front of us from the beginning." She walked towards the study and invited everyone to follow. Standing beside Edmund's large writing desk, she pressed gently against one of the carved wooden panels beneath the shelves. It shifted almost silently. Hidden behind the paneling was a narrow service passage, built generations earlier so servants could move between rooms without disturbing the family. Time had concealed its entrance so perfectly that nobody thought to look for it. Roger knew about the passage since childhood. After killing Edmund, he locked the study door, slipped through the hidden opening, replaced the panel behind him, and calmly returned to the rest of the house before anyone noticed his absence. The scratches on the floor, the disturbed bookcase, and the hidden compartment had all pointed towards the same forgotten passage. They had simply been overlooked until the pieces finally fell into place. Inspector Blake stepped towards Roger. For the first time since the investigation began, Roger's confidence disappeared. His shoulders sank, his face turned pale. For several long moments he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he admitted the truth. He confessed that his father had stolen the investment money decades earlier. Edmund had discovered the evidence, but chose to protect the family name rather than expose his own uncle. Roger spent years fearing that one day those papers would surface and destroy everything his family still possessed. When Edmund returned to Meadowbrook, promising to settle old debts and reveal old secrets, Roger knew exactly what that meant. He convinced himself there was only one way to keep the truth buried. By the time he realized what he had done, it was already too late. As the constables led Roger from the manor, an uneasy silence settled over the house. Clara Finch stood by the window, watching the police carriage disappear down the long drive. She did not celebrate. There was no joy to be found in the truth. Edmund Harrow had made terrible mistakes, but he had also spent 20 years trying to find the courage to correct them. In the end, he had paid for his silence with his life. Some secrets, Miss Marple reflected, become far more dangerous the longer they are hidden. A few days later, life slowly returned to Meadowbrook. The village resumed its familiar rhythm. Children laughed on their way to school. Shopkeepers reopened their doors. The church bell once again marked peaceful afternoons instead of tragedy. Meadowbrook Manor remained standing above the village, quieter than before, its windows looking out across the fields as though keeping watch over the past. Miss Marple paused at the village green before making her way home. She glanced once towards the distant manor and smiled to herself. Every mystery, no matter how impossible it first appears, leaves behind a trail. One only needs the patience to notice the smallest clue, because the smallest clue is often the one that tells the whole story. If you enjoyed spending time in the quiet villages, hidden secrets, and impossible mysteries of Miss Marple, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your own theory in the comments. At what moment did you realize who the killer really was, and which clue first caught your attention? Until next time, keep your eyes open, because in places that seem perfectly peaceful, the darkest secrets are often hiding in plain sight.